The sky over Calix was a hellscape. Massive bursts of blue and red streaked through the air as the Erection warships unleashed their firepower on the human positions below. The ground trembled with every explosion, and the scent of burning metal and scorched earth filled the air. On the ground, General Ryan Cole surveyed the destruction with a grim expression. His forces were outnumbered, their ammunition running low, but they weren't going to give up. Not yet. "We can't hold this position for much longer, sir," Lieutenant Jack Warren said, his voice tight over the comms. "Erection dropships are already making landing just outside our perimeter." Cole's fingers tightened on the control panel in front of him. He glanced at the holographic map that showed the incoming Erection forces closing in. The enemy fleet, vast and imposing, had hammered the human defenses from orbit, and now the infantry were coming in to finish the job. His soldiers had fought like hell to hold on to Calix, but it was only a matter of time before the Erections overwhelmed them. "Fall back to secondary defense points," Cole barked, his voice cutting through the static of the battlefield. "We're not giving them Calix without a fight." But as he turned to issue orders to his commanders, something caught his eye. Movement to the west, a flash of something that didn't belong. Through the rising dust and smoke, he saw a small group of soldiers, their camouflage blending with the war-torn landscape, sprinting toward the Erection command center at the edge of the city. They weren't retreating, they were advancing. "Sergeant Harper," Cole's voice crackled through his comm. "What the hell are you doing?" Sergeant Emily Harper's voice came through, calm as always, though Cole could hear the hum of tension in the background. "Sir, we're going for their command center. They think they've broken us, but we're not finished yet." Cole's stomach knotted. Harper and her squad were good, damn good, but this was suicide. The Erections would wipe them out before they even got close to the command center. "Get back here, Sergeant." "That's an order." "We'll be fine, General," Harper replied, her voice cutting through the static. "We've got a surprise for them." Before Cole could respond, the comms went silent. His heart raced as he watched his soldiers pulling back, but his eyes kept darting to the screen. Harper's squad was too far out, and yet they weren't stopping. "Please," Cole muttered to himself, "don't make me regret this." The Erection forces were closing in, their vast war machines like iron giants, relentless and unyielding. But Sergeant Emily Harper and her squad weren't retreating. They were moving deeper into the heart of the Erection command structure, determined to strike at the nerve center of the invaders. They had no choice. If they didn't take down the command center, Calix was lost, and they'd be next. Emily's boots hit the cracked earth, her breath coming in sharp bursts as she and her team crouched behind the ruins of a shattered building, eyes trained on the looming Erection command tower in the distance. The sky above crackled with the distant rumble of Erection artillery, but for now, they were out of sight. "We're almost there," Emily said, scanning the horizon with a pair of modified Erection binoculars. "Just stay sharp." "Sharp as ever, Sarge," Corporal Jason Miller replied, checking his weapon. His voice was laced with tension, but it had that same dry humor that Emily had come to rely on during the worst of battles. Emily gave him a quick glance. "Let's keep it that way, Miller. No room for screw-ups now." The plan was simple: infiltrate the command tower, plant the explosives, and get the hell out. The Erections had fortified the building to the teeth, but the humans had something they didn't: unpredictability. And if there was one thing the Erections hadn't planned for, it was humans who refused to fight by the rules. They moved swiftly, darting between the ruins of collapsed buildings, their bodies pressed low to the ground. As they approached the perimeter of the tower, Emily stopped. The Eryxians had set up an automated defense grid designed to detect and eliminate any threats. But the humans had learned quickly from their previous encounters with the invaders. "Miller, get the jammer ready," she whispered. Miller nodded, pulling out a small device that had been hastily assembled from captured Eryxian tech. It would only work for a short time, but it was enough. The moment the jammer powered up, the defensive grid flickered, then died. "We're in," Emily murmured, her heart pounding. But just as they moved forward, an Eryxian patrol appeared on the far side of the compound, their sleek black armor reflecting the fiery glow of distant explosions. Emily cursed under her breath. They had to move fast. "Form up," she barked. "We're doing this, now." With a collective, silent nod, the squad moved in unison. Human ingenuity and Eryxian tech fused together in one brutal, calculated strike. The Eryxian command center loomed ahead, a stark monolith of gleaming black metal and swirling alien energy fields. Sergeant Emily Harper's squad pressed forward, every footstep synchronized, every breath measured. The rest of the world seemed to fade as they approached the heart of the enemy's power. The plan had to work. There was no second chance. "Jammers holding steady." Corporal Miller whispered, his fingers tight around the trigger of his rifle. "We're good for now." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the perimeter of the complex. Their luck had held so far. No alarms, no patrols. But she knew that could change at any moment. If they didn't move fast, the Eryxians would lock them down within seconds. She reached for her comms, her voice barely a breath. "Cole, we're almost in position. Keep the pressure on the east front. We need their attention diverted for at least 10 more minutes." General Cole's voice crackled through her earpiece, steady as always. "Roger that, Harper. Just don't do anything stupid. You've got 10 minutes, and then I'm pulling you out, whether you're done or not." Harper grinned, though it was more out of reflex than any real humour. Asterisk 10 minutes asterisk. That was hardly enough time. But they'd been through worse. As they reached the outer perimeter of the command tower, Emily took a deep breath. She had no doubt that the Eryxians had placed every possible safeguard here. Motion sensors, guards, automated turrets. They weren't going to make it easy. But they had one advantage: the humans were unpredictable. And as she'd seen in battle after battle, unpredictability was a weapon the Eryxians didn't know how to handle. Miller was the first to make it to the entrance, crouching down by the door's biometric lock. He'd learned how to hack Eryxian systems from scavenged tech, and he was damn good at it. 15 seconds, he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. A sharp hiss echoed through the compound, and the massive door to the command center slid open with a smooth mechanical groan. Inside was a world of blinking lights, flashing displays, and ominous machinery, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The squad entered quickly, their boots making soft echoes in the cavernous hall. The scent of alien circuitry and sterile air filled Emily's lungs. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto the main control panel at the far side of the room. "Get to the console," she ordered. "Plant the charges. Now." But as her team moved to carry out the plan, the lights in the command center flickered. And suddenly, she knew they were no longer alone. An alarm blared through the corridors, a high-pitched screech that rattled her nerves. The Eryxians had activated the secondary defense protocols. The countdown had started, and they had only minutes to finish the job. The alarm screeched in Emily Harper's ears as the Eryxian command center plunged into chaos. The lights flickered, turning the sterile alien room into a dark labyrinth of shifting shadows and red emergency signals. The squad's movements grew more frantic as they split into two teams, rushing to plant explosives while trying to avoid detection. Time was running out. Explosives in place. Corporal Miller's voice crackled through the comms, ready for detonation. Emily glanced at the digital countdown on her wrist, a mere 3 minutes until Erickson reinforcements arrived. Their jammer was still holding, but for how long? She felt a growing sense of urgency as the metallic clang of Erickson footsteps echoed from the far hallways. They'd been spotted. The door to the command center slammed open. A squad of heavily armoured Erickson soldiers poured in, weapons raised. Emily's pulse spiked, but she didn't hesitate. She threw herself behind a console, pulling her squad into cover. "Get to the secondary exit," she shouted. "Move! Move! Move!" As her team rushed toward the back of the room, the Ericksons opened fire, their plasma rifles turning the air into firestorms. Emily ducked behind a nearby pillar, her heart racing as the blasts impacted the walls around her. The explosion of energy made the floor tremble beneath her feet. "Harper." Miller's voice came through the comm. "We've got a problem. The jammer's failing. We've only got one shot to get out before they activate their full defenses." Emily's breath caught. If the jammer failed, their escape route would be sealed. The Erickson's defensive grid would activate and lock the entire building down, trapping them inside. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Pull the damn detonator!" She screamed, crawling across the floor to where Miller was stationed, holding the trigger to the explosives. She could hear the Ericksons advancing, the sound of their footfalls quickening. "Are we sure this will work?" Miller asked, his hand hovering over the button. "It has to," she said, her voice tight with desperation. "They can't have time to regroup. Detonate now." Miller pressed the trigger. A deafening explosion rocked the building, shaking it to its core. The Erickson command center erupted in a shower of fire and debris, sending shockwaves through the walls. The blast tore through the heart of the structure, igniting everything in its path. Emily could barely hear anything above the roar of the explosion as she scrambled to her feet. She grabbed Miller's arm, pulling him toward the exit. The building was coming apart, but they had one shot at freedom. "Run!" she shouted. As the smoke billowed around them, the squad sprinted through the wreckage, knowing full well that the Ericksons would not let this go unanswered. The battle for Calix was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. But they had struck a blow, and somehow, against all odds, they'd survived. For now. The days after the assault on the Erickson command center were a blur of shattered morale and fractured hopes. Calix had been ravaged, its cities burned, its skies choked with smoke. But the humans had done what the Ericksons never expected. They had struck a blow that couldn't be ignored. The command center's destruction sent shockwaves through the Erickson war effort. It wasn't a victory, but it was a disruption, and for a moment it was enough to shift the balance of the war. But at what cost? General Ryan Cole stood before the ruined remains of Calix's capital, his boots sinking into the ash and mud. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt from days of sleepless planning, but there was no time for rest. His forces had taken heavy losses, and more were coming. Every battle seemed like a losing proposition, but he couldn't afford to let his people lose hope. Not now, not after everything they'd sacrificed. "Sir," Lieutenant Jack Warren called, approaching with a grim expression. "We've just received a transmission from Erickson Command. They're moving reinforcements to Calix's northern sector. They're gearing up for a counteroffensive. We don't have the resources to hold them off if they come all at once." Cole ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The enemy's forces were immense, their numbers overwhelming. His troops were tired, hungry, and demoralized. There was no question about it. Unless something changed, they were doomed. "We need a diversion," Cole muttered under his breath. He turned to Warren. "Contact Sergeant Harper. Tell her to prepare for a recon mission. We're going to have to hit them where it hurts." Warren hesitated. "General, Harper's team. They've been through hell. We don't have the manpower to waste on another suicide mission. I don't care what we got left. If we don't take that northern sector, Calix falls, and we lose everything. Harper knows what she's doing. She's tough, and she'll get it done." Warren nodded reluctantly, but it was clear he didn't like it. No one did. The war had drained them all. It wasn't just the physical toll, the loss of comrades, the never-ending pressure. It was the psychological toll. The moment a soldier started questioning whether the fight was worth it, they were already halfway to defeat. Meanwhile, Sergeant Harper stood by the edge of the battlefield, looking out at the destruction. Her squad had done what they could, but now the weight of the next move settled on her shoulders. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting for the survival of an entire species. And the price of that survival was becoming clearer with every passing day. "Is it even worth it anymore?" she muttered to herself. Her eyes lingered on the horizon, where the distant Erection warships gathered like a storm, poised to strike. "Yes," she whispered. "It has to be." The following days were filled with tension, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and desperation. General Cole knew they were nearing the breaking point. Calix had become a tombstone, a war-torn monument to humanity's stubborn defiance, but even the most relentless resistance couldn't last forever. His hands gripped the edge of the table in his command center, a map of Calix's ruined sectors spread before him. Erection forces were regrouping, tightening their grip on the planet, and the northern front was falling apart. He had lost count of the number of times he had called in reinforcements, only to watch them be obliterated by the superior firepower of the Erection war machine. He looked up as Lieutenant Warren entered, carrying a data pad. "General," Warren began, his voice heavy with hesitation. "We've just received an encrypted message from an Erection diplomat." Cole raised an eyebrow. "An Erection diplomat? Are you sure it's not a trap?" "We're running it through decryption now, but it looks legitimate, sir." Warren handed him the data pad. "This came from a faction within the Erection command that wants to negotiate." Cole's fingers hovered over the screen, uncertain. The idea of peace, especially with the Erections, felt like a betrayal of everything they had fought for. But war had a way of twisting even the noblest of goals into something darker. He glanced at the message, his expression unreadable as he read through the encrypted lines. "General Cole," the message began, "we represent the faction of Valen, a member of the Erection High Command. It is clear that the war between our people cannot continue without mutual destruction. We offer you a ceasefire to discuss terms of peace and cooperation. Our warriors, led by Warlord Slane, are blinded by pride and aggression. We seek to end this conflict before it consumes us all. Accept our offer, and we may yet forge a new path together. The future of both our species depends on it. Cole sat back, his mind racing. There was something in the message that felt genuine, something that hinted at fractures within the Erection leadership. If there was any chance of ending this war before the total annihilation of both sides, he had to explore it. But the risks were enormous. "Get me Sergeant Harper," Cole said, "and I want to speak to Valen now." Later that evening, as Emily Harper prepared for a covert mission to gather intel on Erection troop movements, she received word from General Cole. The news was like a sudden, sharp breath of air in a dark room. The humans were going to meet with the enemy, not in battle, but at the negotiating table. "Looks like we're not done fighting just yet," she muttered under her breath, staring at the stars outside the transport bay. But the weight of the message, of the possibility of peace, gnawed at her. Was it even possible to trust them? The fate of Calix, and of humanity itself, would depend on this uncertain gamble. The summit took place under a heavy, uncertain sky. Calix's once pristine atmosphere, now streaked with the remnants of the brutal war, seemed to echo the mood of the human delegation as they assembled for the delicate negotiations. General Cole stood at the front, his face set in grim determination, but there was no hiding the weight of the moment in his eyes. Sergeant Harper, who had led the assault on the Eriksson Command Center just days before, stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching as the alien ship carrying the Eriksson diplomats touched down. Despite everything they had fought for, despite the blood they had spilled, the humans were now expected to sit across the table from the very force that had caused them so much suffering. And not just any Eriksson warlord, but Selene, the commander who had crushed entire human fleets with ruthless precision. Cole wasn't sure how to feel about it. The message from Valen had seemed genuine, but the Eriksson war machine wasn't known for making peace. Every instinct told him to keep his guard up, but something in his gut told him that they had no choice but to at least try. As the Eriksson ship descended onto the desolate surface of Calix, a heavy silence filled the air. The ship's massive black hull shimmered with energy fields as it landed with a soft thud. A hatch opened and Valen, the Eriksson diplomat who had reached out for peace, emerged. He was tall, his skin a deep purple hue, his face sharp and angular, framed by a crown-like crest that marked him as a high-ranking member of his species. His demeanor was calm, controlled, but the sharpness of his eyes spoke of a deep, wary intelligence. "General Cole," Valen greeted, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "I trust this meeting will go as smoothly as possible." Cole didn't return the greeting immediately. He stared at the Eriksson diplomat, sizing him up, weighing every word. The tension was palpable. "You asked for this meeting," Cole said bluntly, his tone unyielding. "If you want peace, you better be ready to prove it. Every human who has died in this war is a stain on your conscience, and I'm not in the habit of forgiving easily." Valen's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained serene. "I understand your position, General, but this war is not one we can afford to win. The cost has already been too great for both our peoples." Behind them, Harper stood silently, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She'd had seen atrocities, things she would never forget. But the prospect of peace, however fragile, was something she hadn't dared dream of. Still, the idea of shaking hands with the enemy after everything they'd lost felt almost sacrilegious. "We're here to talk," Valen continued, his voice taking on a note of urgency. "But the clock is ticking. If we do not end this now, we both risk losing everything." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the war seemed almost distant, as if they were talking about something far away, something abstract. But Harper knew the truth. Peace would only come if both sides were willing to swallow their pride and pay the price. General Cole's voice broke the silence. "We're listening, but you better make your case fast." The future of their worlds hinged on these next words. The wind howled across the barren wasteland of Calix as General Ryan Cole and the Eriksson diplomat Valen stood face to face. The meeting between the two sides had been tense, the silence thick with distrust. And yet, despite all the history of violence, of shattered cities and lives lost, there was something unmistakably fragile in the air, a delicate possibility. Valen's eyes, though alien and inscrutable, carried an almost desperate quality now, as though the weight of his words have finally caught up with him. "We cannot afford to destroy each other any longer, General," Valen said, his voice steady but tinged with a rare vulnerability. "Our warlords, Lane, and others like him, are blinded by the hunger for power. They see your people as mere obstacles to their conquest. But there is another way forward. If you and I can reach an agreement, we can dismantle the warlords' influence and end the destruction. Both our species can survive." Cole studied the Erixian diplomat, his jaw tight. The memories of lost comrades, of burning cities, of the cries of civilians caught in the crossfire haunted him. He had seen enough to know that the price of peace was never cheap, but the cost of continued war would be immeasurable. The choice wasn't simple. "You want us to trust you," Cole said, his voice low and edged with suspicion. "After everything you've done, after the bloodshed, you think I can just forget about that?" Valen did not flinch. His gaze was unwavering. "No, General, I am not asking for forgiveness. What I am asking for is an opportunity, a chance to remove the warlords, to prevent further bloodshed, and to build something new from the ashes of our conflict. The cost of continuing this war is too high even for us. The Erixian fleet is losing more and more resources as we fight. We cannot keep this up much longer without collapsing." A bitter laugh escaped Cole's throat. "And if we do this, what guarantee do we have that you won't stab us in the back the moment we turn our backs?" "There are no guarantees in war," Valen replied. "Only the hope that peace, however fragile, can be built on trust, and the truth that if we do not change course, there will be no one left to rule this galaxy." Behind them, Harper and the rest of the squad watched in silence. They had all heard the stories, seen the scars the Erixians had left. But there was something in the air now, something that felt like the quiet before a storm, like the weight of a decision that would change everything. Cole exhaled slowly, weighing the future of two species in his hands. His voice broke the silence with an edge of finality. "All right," he said, "but understand this, Valen. If this is a lie, if you betray us, there will be no second chance. The next time we meet, it won't be under a flag of peace." Valen nodded, a small, knowing glint in his eyes. "I understand, General, but this is no lie. This is the only way forward." The sound of distant explosions echoed in the background, a reminder that the war was still far from over. But in that moment, a fragile thread of hope wove its way through the hearts of the humans and Erixians alike. A new chapter was beginning, not through conquest, but through a gamble on something far more dangerous: trust. And for the first time in a long while, Emily Harper allowed herself to believe that peace might be possible, even in the aftermath of war.